Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMann and Anthony, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
All right, welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. You've got Anthony Paluska, and I'm here with Dean McMann today. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by Brian Silverman. Brian is, I'll let you introduce yourself here in a second, but Brian's an experienced professional services leader, and you'll understand this by the topic that we dive into today, but he is a strong advocate for strategic workforce planning and trying to drive efficiency, profitability, client satisfaction, all the value that workforce planning and thinking about how to do that strategically actually has on your business. That's often overlooked, I would say, and we'll explore that a little bit further. But before we dive into that topic, Brian, welcome to the podcast. Feel free to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail.
Okay, thank you, Dean, thank you, Anthony. Appreciate the opportunity. I've been in the professional services, consulting, technology delivery world, whatever you called it at the time, for the better part of my career. That's been, I started out in the consulting world with at the time what was still Anderson Consulting, and I kind of worked my way up through that, and then got into the software business around 2000. But all the while, kind of moving up through the ranks and learning what it means to run a professional services organization. The topic I want to cover today is one that doesn't get as much, and Anthony, you alluded to this, doesn't get as much focus in some places that it needs to. And I say it needs to because, we're in a people business. Everybody says that, but we are in a people business, right? That's our asset. We're selling services. We want to sell them from a high quality perspective, from a high power team. And that means we need to have the right folks in place at the right time. And that's a very, kind of high level basic statement. And I don't think anybody would argue with that, but it's defining what is the right people? What does that mean? What does the right time mean? And how do we get there? And it's critical that there's a strategy in place, not an ad hoc, hey, I think we're going to need some people, let's go out and get some. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I completely agree, right? Very much a people business, and a neglected part of that people business is how do we make sure that we're staffing our team members appropriately for development, but also for the benefit of the business? How do we make sure that we're hiring and resourcing and staffing people to the appropriate projects? And how is that evolving and changing with the new expectations from customers and virtual delivery methodologies versus having to be in person more and more frequently? So I want to dive into kind of all of that at the highest level when we say, right, this concept of we want organizations to rethink their staffing strategies and their workforce planning strategies. Just top level, define that for us, and then talk about some of those challenges that an organization might be faced with.
Yeah. So again, I think what I've seen historically is kind of a senior leader viewpoint that's largely driven by short term. What's this quarter going to look like kind of perspective, and certainly that's important, right? We have investors, we have numbers that have to sound good and look good. But there can be an emphasis on that at the expense of looking like what's next quarter going to look like. And that's going to be defined by having, again, the right people in place that we can meet demand. So none of this is necessarily new or associated with new technologies, or, certainly there's an impact on how the business has evolved. But there needs to be a process. You can't dictate what that's going to look like, but there needs to be a strategy that says, based on these metrics, it's got to be metric driven. This is how we're going to decide when and who and how we're going to resource, so that 6 months from now, And 6 months may or may not be right. It'll differ based on the characteristics of your business. How long does it take to get somebody up to speed? How long is the sales cycle? What does your backlog look like? But what does it look like on a go-forward basis so we're not reacting? Reacting doesn't work in this business, right? We're not a manufacturing floor. We could spin up products real quickly and meet demand. You've got to put out job descriptions. You've got to get resumes. You've got to recruit. You've got to give offers. They've got to give notice. And suddenly 4 months go by from the time you decide you need somebody.
Yeah, and that discounts any learning curve associated with the onboarding to get somebody up to full levels of productivity, which may vary based on the specialization of the role, the level of experience, all of that, which in some cases could be, 6-12 months long before you've got a fully productive member of your team that's at the level that you've hired them for.
That's right. And not being proactive, really the reaction can take the shape in two different ways. One, we delay doing work because we just don't have enough people. And so now you've got backlog growing in an unhealthy way, and we're giving up revenue opportunities. Or you take some of those folks that you talked about who we brought on board but are not really ready for prime time, and we say, go on the project, we need people. And that creates all kinds of other downstream problems.
Do you think that, so if you look at Anderson when you were there, we don't see many PS embedded programs right now bringing in junior people and taking the time to develop them and train them, right? They very much want just-in-time people who may not be knowledgeable about the consultant aspects, but are knowledgeable about technology, right?
So yeah, and the notion of just-in-time, people have talked about that. This just-in-time doesn't work in the consulting business. It does, but you have to define what in-time means in our world. I'm a big proponent of college recruiting, and partially because I grew up in that world. But if you put a good college recruiting in place and you support it, I've seen organizations say, let's do college recruiting. They go to a career fair, they bring people on board, and they say, now what do we do with them? But if you have a good program in place that's supported, you get very smart people who are very eager to learn, who are very eager to work hard, are inexpensive, and you could really kind of bring them up within the culture of your organization. And Dean, I saw you had a post yesterday and you talked about building the pyramid, right? That's how you do it, right? You have junior people and they become more senior people and you bring in more junior people. It's tricky, but I am a believer in bringing in junior people when possible.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can get your organization to ever buy into that, you've solved a myriad of problems because they can learn the consulting side, they can learn the technology side. It is an investment, but boy, I've just never seen anything pay off as well as that.
I was saying there's this notion in sports where coaches talking about having a next man up philosophy, right? So they always got the next guy on the bench to put in the game. May not be a starter, but they're ready to jump into the game. And that's what this pyramid you talk about is. It's build the next man up strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. So that you're never, and it gives you the freedom. And I was in a meeting years and years ago, and Dave Maister talked about this. I don't remember Dave. He wrote the Managing the Professional Service Firm, but he talked about how important the pyramid was because you have the freedom to actually fire people.
And that's right.
How many times are practices held hostage by a few experts?
Right.
And they're overpaid sometimes, and we can't move around them, and they don't really want to train anybody because their value is their expertise.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And it's something I'll talk about, I call unforecasted demand. One part of that is attrition. And so, if you separate out, just take away the part where the low performers, attrition is a real thing. And it's not planned for. And if you don't have the pyramid supported, then you're right. You lose a person, and then either you have somebody very junior who stick in their place, or again, you have a hole. And you're right. Then there's an extra. It's a different angle to look at the low performers, because when you have low performers and you don't move them out because you need the billable revenue, you're creating a potential black eye with that customer. Your high performers are watching this, and they're observing that low performers are getting they're getting supported, they're getting rewarded, and that creates an element and a dynamic within the team that could be quite detrimental.
Yeah, they're taking a spot on the team that could be a potential future high performer. And so you're hamstringing the future of your organization by not bringing somebody else in that you can start to evaluate and move through that development process in order to get them where they need to be, which is why, right, everybody's always shooting for this perfect staffing model, which is our utilization is exactly at target and our revenue's here and we have this many clients, but if one of those people are underperforming, it throws that off. If somebody leaves for some reason, it throws that off. If we sell an extra project, so you're never perfect, right? The thing I think you're searching for in this, and push back if you see it differently, is you want a model that's agile and can flex to the needs of the business. And to do that, you need high performers, you need the right pyramid type structure, you need a constant recruiting and hiring cycle so that you're bringing in new talent all the time to continue to push the rest of the team, but also make sure that you're filling gaps. That's what I think that mentality is what's actually needed to solve the problem, rather than trying to solve for the perfect alignment of utilization, revenue, client mix, skill mix, those sorts of things, because perfect is never possible there.
No, and you're right. The idea is to regularly revisit, and you have your metrics. Like I said, you have your metrics. You know how long it's going to take to get somebody on board and have them actually be ready to build customer. And you use and every month or every quarter, and again, defined by your business, you look at where we are, what are we doing right now, what does our backlog look like, what are those deals that are committed to close this quarter, what are the deals that look like they're going to close next quarter, and you put some metric on that to because you're not going to hire to say we're going to close all these deals in 6 months from now, but you stay ahead of it and you watch it. And that's really all this is. It's give it thought. Have a plan in place.
Um, we see this. I'm sure you see the same thing. You have organizations that, even though they're tracking all of those metrics, they're looking at their pipeline, they're looking at their utilization, they know when they need something. They're still hesitant to hire ahead of demand or bring on non-billable staff. Speak a little bit to what impact that has to the organization, and maybe how you get yourself out of that mentality.
First of all, what drives those kinds of decisions, and I think it's obvious and it's well known, there's, and I said this earlier, there's a need to support short-term operational and financial metrics. And that's not going to ever go away. The impact of not being there when needed, of making the roll call, of missing that, right? Mistiming when to hire, has a number of aspects. There's the obvious, there's revenue. There's work to be done and we don't have enough people, right? And that's services revenue. There's actually potential impact to software revenue. So you have customers who are on the clock, right? On the subscription clock. And they say, hang on a second, I'm not paying for subscription until you guys get this thing up and running. So the longer you delay that, the more you have potential impact to ARR. And depending where you are on the renewal cycle, you may be looking at a potential churn, right? And so there's a huge revenue risk. There's a cost piece to it. Right? So what happens when you don't have enough people? You start stretching resources thin. You start putting people on 3, 4, 5 projects for a few hours here, a few hours there. It doesn't work. People start cutting corners. People start rushing. Mistakes are made. And you end up with concessions, right? You have customers that are upset. It's hurting the relationship. And so you start making concessions. And once you open the door to concessions, it's hard to close that. It's hard to put that genie back in the bottle, right? And you have, and this is probably last but not least, and that's morale and perspective from the consulting team. Right? So consultants, I like to say professional services, it's a complicated business. There's an easy part, which is the math. It's rate times hours times utilization equals X dollars. But the tricky part is we're dealing with people, and people are complicated. And so to deliver quality, you need folks who feel good about what they're doing. And when you start pushing more hours on them and more work, they start questioning what they're doing, what kind of impact they're having. And that leads to things like we talked about earlier. It could lead to attrition. It leads to just lack of engagement. It leads, as Stephen Covey said, we're not caring for the golden geese. And again, that's gold in this business.
Yeah, and I think those pieces that you just mentioned, those are that all those costs and all that revenue is and missed opportunity. Being able to quantify that or at least communicate about that compared to what the tangible risk or financial cost of hiring somebody that's going to sit on the bench for 2 months while we wait on the next project to come in, right? We have to be able to have that conversation. And because all of the things that you just mentioned are some of the hidden costs or lost opportunities, and it's always pushed up against, and I think this is what organizations struggle with, the very real financial outlay of, all right, I'm hiring 5 more people, but I don't have a project to put them onto yet. That you could feel that, you could see that on the P&L. It's just more real to them.
I think that's their lack of understanding, though. To be honest, very few of these companies have their consulting staff cost or revenue as a huge driver of their financial quarter. It is an attitude of this should run like everything else, and it runs differently. And Anthony said this a little while ago, and I'll just do it again, which is we should be hiring all the time and firing all the time, right? People should get better. If they don't get better, then they've outlasted our pyramid, and that's hard. And I'll just pick on the IBM company. When IBM went through this, IBM has a different HR, and I think they still do, a different HR department for professional services than for the rest of the company, because professional services operates differently. And I think that's one of the challenges. I think the assumption that we're hurting the financials is because we have a couple of extra people is a fallacy. But they look at it like it's the same thing as the marketing department or the same thing as some other non-sales department.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you that when I was at Calidus Software, which is now part of SAP, that was the highest functioning professional services organization I've ever been part of. I was the vice president of services for the Americas. And we did just what you were talking to. We had our own operations group. We had our own P&L. And the decisions about when to hire, when to fire, who to have on the bench, that was up to services leadership, right? Services leadership had numbers. They had revenue and marching goals. And the marching orders were, show us these numbers, and you guys hire and fire and do what you need to do to run your business. And as opposed to, as you said, having a CFO that views the business as the business and thinks an extra consultant is like an extra marketing person, and it's just a cost. And it's just a cycle. And you look at the short-term numbers, and when you make the kinds of sacrifices we're talking about to hit the short-term numbers, you're just kicking it down the road. Because if you make those decisions now, next quarter is going to be bad. And so you keep doing that. You keep saying, just for the sake of this quarter, let's make the decisions. Next quarter, we'll worry about next quarter.
Yeah, and I think what really happens, and you said this, what really happens is we lose all our A players because we don't like to, consultants don't like to work in chaos, right? Right. So all we gave them was chaos, and it's an interesting thing. But I am glad to hear you talk about one organization that had matured enough that it was done. I don't want to say appropriately, but a lot more freedom to take the proper action.
It was no question. I mean, it was objectively effective, high performing, great relationship with customers, great numbers. I mean, it really and just a team unity that is hard to replicate.
So let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about bringing on talent and firing as appropriate so that we keep our talent model with our A players. But even our A players need ongoing development, especially early in their career. What are some of the challenges to investing in that talent development piece? Because we feel like it's such an underinvested in area across the overall enterprise spend.
Yeah, and it's a great point, and the reasons behind that are really no different than what we've been talking about. There's a cost that shows up on a sheet that says, if I take this person out of the field and lower their utilization to 60% for the next 3 months, that equals X. But if that person leaves, it equals 10X. But you have to get past that. It's that data that's not hard data. You have to be able to speak to the costs associated with not developing our people. whether it's because they're not developing the right skills that we need, or they feel like they're not developing enough professionally and personally, and they look to move on elsewhere. Again, it gets back to that people are complicated kind of thing.
Yeah, you have to balance both what is best for the, right, I think of, right, there's the formal training and development aspect of it, which comes with a cost in many cases and comes with taking somebody out of the market, delivering for a customer. And then you have the on-the-job kinds of training that takes place as part of any professional services individual's career journey. And for those, the resource management aspect of it becomes more complicated because people are complicated, right? There's what's needed for this project, who's available, and then what's needed for my team from a development standpoint. So making sure that we're optimizing well, just because this project would run a little bit more efficiently if it had Brian on it, I actually want to put Dean on this particular engagement for development purposes, which means pulling Dean off of something else where he doesn't have the capacity to work on it, right? And so it's juggling those three balls simultaneously as part of your staffing model is at least the way we've looked at it. I don't know, do you have the same opinion of that, or do you see a different lever to be pulled in terms of making sure that we do that on the job development appropriately?
No, I agree with you. And the other aspect is I may say, I've got Dean on this project. I've been talking to Dean. Dean really wants to develop himself in this part of the business. He wants to understand the numbers. He wants to be involved more with the sales team, with the product team, with support. It's important to him for that area to grow, and it's important for us as an organization. That will pay dividends. So I'm going to take Dean out and make him 50% utilized. I'm going to start bringing him to these operational meetings where he's going to learn the business to that level. He'll feel good about himself, and we're gonna reap the benefits. It's the same convincing you have to do up the chain, though, right? They're always going to fall down to, wait a second, 50% utilization means this number is not going to be where we want it to be this quarter, and that's a constant battle. It always will be, but it's a conversation that needs to continue to be had.
Well, what's the best way to create a staffing model, staffing strategy that actually works long term? And we've talked about hiring, we've talked about development, we've talked about all those things, and we've talked about the need for communication and understanding that. But also incorporated into that strategy, if you would, the role, if any, third-party partners or subcontractors play in filling some of those gaps for a period of time or for specific topics.
Yeah, no. I'm a big believer in effectively managing your resource pool, leveraging third parties. Third parties, consultants are by definition nearly 100% utilized, right? You're only paying for what they're billing. 95% they do sit through some meetings. And so really this discussion when I talk about resourcing is really about meeting resourcing demand. So third parties absolutely play into that. I think what can be tricky and what has to be managed closely, and it's similar to the college recruiting in that you can't just say, I'm going to use third parties, put them on that project. They're representing your organization. If they get a black eye, you get a black eye. At the end of the day, it's the customer having that experience with your company. And so there needs to be, I've always seen it work very well if there are some level of a certification program. And you have to have a model where you're pairing up their folks with your folks until you feel comfortable they could step in and do the job. And even then, I've always found it valuable to take a senior level architect type resource and have a process in place with our partners that says, at these key critical gates in the project, we will have a review by our architects, and that will make sure everything's staying on track. But it's absolutely a way to flex your bench up and down without going through hiring, without going through firing. Again, what you can't do is just throw that at the problem. It's got to be managed.
And when you say third parties, you're talking about contractors now. You're not talking about the big four, really.
Right. And yes. So when I look at the big four, was the big eight when I started. When I look at the big four,
you're dating yourself now, buddy.
I know. Primarily, I see them as, it depends on the size of the company, right? Primarily, I see them as working with sales, wanting to form their own practice, helping to sell, taking on engagements on their own, and doing it outside of the purview of professional services. That's its own kind of beast. What I'm talking about is staff augmentation. And it could be contractors just doing one-offs, or it could be a company that has developed enough of a capability where you could say, hey, you guys take this one. I don't have the bandwidth. But it's that level, right? It is much more staff augmentation.
I get it. That's great. That's great. I just wanted everybody to understand that we weren't talking about the complexity of dealing with PricewaterhouseCoopers or something.
No. Now, if you're in the business and your product is that level of complexity where it's a 2-year engagement for $9 million and you need to engage 37 people, that's when you will see the Deloitte step in and take over.
And you notice I said PW, not Anderson, because we have different heritages, you and I.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So, one of the nice things today is we're really diving into, and this has been great, we're really diving into a topic that we don't think our market either gets the opportunity to do well enough because of the pressures we've talked about, or maybe not experienced in doing it, knowing what needs to be done. So I think this is very meaningful and extremely helpful, and you've been extremely articulate about it. Before we begin to bring the conversation to a close, do you have a couple of takeaways that you'd want everybody to keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think the keys are creating a habit, right? So creating a process, not like once in a while, hey, how are we doing? But this is a regularly scheduled program, right? And we're going to evaluate some metrics and decide we may not hire anybody, but we're going to at least look at it and make that conscious decision. The other thing, and I alluded to this earlier, what I call unforecasted demands. You can't just look at Salesforce and say, we have 4 deals closing this quarter, we need to staff to it. We talked about attrition. Attrition happens. You need to think about those things. You need to hire assuming you're going to leave you're going to lose somebody this year. You're going to lose 2 people this year. You have bluebird deals, right? Everybody, you don't want to start dreading the new deal, right? Because you can't staff it. And you have change requests, right? You have change requests happen. So, I've been in organizations where 50% of my business was going through changes, and changes by definition were never forecasted for. So suddenly I have this team and I have these 2 resources. I thought I'm going to need them for 2 months. I need them for 6 months. Not prepared for that. So you need to take all that into account when you're looking at what do we need. It's not just what's in front of you. It's what you know is coming.
Yeah, I think that one of the things we've been working with some of our clients on is like a model that they can, at least, as you said, don't get it right, but get all the pieces, right? Get the piece. But like you said, change requests and upsells, those aren't bad news. And if you start regretting good news, you're on the wrong side of the staffing model.
Oh yeah, when you find yourself hearing that the sales team lost a deal and you go, thank God, then you know you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, we don't want to be there. Listen, this has been great. Anthony, do you have any last moment questions for her? By the way, we're not brothers. We just look a lot alike. So just want everybody to get that.
I should have brought my hat.
Yeah, I had to wear a hat today for everybody because I had a little operation on my head. So go ahead, Anthony. Anything in closing?
No, Brian, I appreciate the insights here. And I do agree with Dean. I think it's a topic that is underappreciated right now. And I think the clarity that you brought to this on just this idea of how do you actually think about your staffing model in a holistic way and in a long-term way rather than what are we trying to solve for this quarter becomes just the mentality that all leaders need to take on this topic.
Thanks so much, buddy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, I thought that was great. As we were just saying near the end of that, how important this is, and how I get it's very important. And as I said somewhere along the way, I'm not sure if I understand if we're not allowed in our industry right now to take a more aggressive stand, or we're not taking it. But getting the data, as we've talked about in so many topics, get the data. Talk about what your financial forecast is, talk about your attrition, talk about your needing to get people ahead, and just educate.
Yeah, I mean, we were this morning talking about a mutual contact of ours who is in a situation right now with probably a bunch of C players that are deep subject matter experts on their topic. They've probably been over promoted because of their value to the organization for filling their content gap, but they're not able to manage and lead a team. They're not able to develop others. And because of that, there's a bunch of people with excess capacity on the team, yet they're going to subcontractors to go and get additional support and resources. And they are worried about what are we going to do when the next deal closes. And we can't make the case to hire ahead of demand because we, on paper, have all of this excess capacity. So, I mean, and that's several hundred consultants on this team. And so it's a very real problem that organizations deal with. And it's a combination of, and the entire professional services team in this case understands the problem that exists there. But the financials and the communication of it and the fact that we have to deliver on our current projects with these people that are topical experts or technical experts prevents us from actually doing what's right for the business 2 quarters from now, 3 quarters from now. And in their case, they have a 12 to 18 month onboarding curve. So, I mean, even more of a reason why this is a challenge, because they have to hire way ahead of demand when they can't possibly anticipate.
Yeah, they're in a very unique, at the end of the curve of how hard this is. But so we don't mislead people. SMEs or technical experts can absolutely learn all the other skills. The problem is when we don't allow them or encourage or enable them, and they end up stuck in those jobs where they're not able to perform all the roles that we expect of them. We may not have even told them what we expect. So this is not, it always gets back to us a lot about development. Let's get these people what they need.
Set expectations and then develop to those expectations and then manage to those expectations and then coach around. I mean, it's the whole journey there.
Yeah, it's a whole running professional service firm. Well, it was great having him. Can't wait to have him back. Anthony, can you sign us off with all the requests?
Yes. Like, subscribe, follow, YouTube, podcast channels, all of the above. Do all of that, right? Grab 2 podcast channels and like and subscribe on both of them. And then if you have any other information or want any other information from us, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or contact us at podcast@consultantsway.com. Looking forward to hearing from everybody. Thank you.